Jury, I'm going to give you some instructions. During the trial, the bailiff will keep you together and will prevent inappropriate conversations between you and any other persons. The bailiff will see to your needs during the trial. However, the bailiff cannot answer any questions about this case or provide you with any information, books, or material. It is strictly forbidden the bailiff to do so. It will instruct you on the laws you must apply to the evidence presented in the case in order to reach a verdict, both orally and by giving you a set of written instructions which you will take with you during the deliberations. These instructions are intended to cover all necessary laws which are pertinent in the case.
Good afternoon. Oh, yeah. Your Honor and members of the jury, my name is Courtney Tudor, and I and my co-counselor plan to prove that Andy Andolshek, well, I'm going to start over. That was really bad. And are representing the state of Montana in this case. Although the initial findings were that Andy Andolshek killed himself by shooting himself in the heart with a sawed-off shotgun, we intend to prove without a doubt that Alvina Manfreda murdered Andy Andolshek. Andy Andolshek was found dead in the Fountain County Jail on Saturday morning, July 11, 1947. Conveniently, his body, still warm, was discovered 30 minutes later by his fiancée, Alvina, and sister, Mrs. Kate Reese. Alvina, despite her outwardly docile appearance, is a killer. She designed the scene to create the illusion that Andy Andolshek took his own life, when truly she murdered her fiancé in cold blood. You will hear testimony from Mary Satink, the deceased stepsister, who illustrated the kind of cold, hard demeanor Miss Manfreda possesses. She'll tell you Miss Manfreda, upon arriving in Baker, quickly took the time to get to know Andy Andolshek. Barely a week. The love had grown cold. The defense is trying to weave a theory of who might have committed this hideous crime. But you can see clearly the evidence cannot be refuted, and Manfreda is the killer. Thank you.
Okay. Your Honor, members of the jury, my name is Hannah Gonzarowski, and I and my co-counselors, Trevor Lingle and Jay Mallon, represent our client, Alvina Manfreda, in this case. We intend to prove to you that Alvina Manfreda was indeed not responsible for the murder of Andrew Andolshek, but instead, Mary Satink was the one with substantially larger motives, and she was the one who shot and killed Andy and staged the scene in such a way to portray our client, Alvina, as the murderer of her own fiancé, Andrew Andolshek. I intend to prove to you today that the current evidence cannot convict our client of this terrible crime. While at first glance, much of the evidence provided may point to our client, however, I implore you to think deeper than the surface of the evidence, and must I remind the jury that the prosecution has the burden of evidence. Our client is a kind-hearted, petite, young woman who fell in love with Mr. Andolshek while he was serving the U.S. Armed Forces in World War II. She was born and raised in Italy and was genuinely terrified of the Nazis and desperately wanted to flee the fascist regime with her newfound love. Andrew was the first to return to the U.S., while Alvina had to wait behind in Italy. However, she was eager to join him as soon as possible. During their time apart, the couple exchanged numerous love letters, each showing genuine love, passion, and care for each other in such a way that such a heinous act that our client is being tried with today is simply impossible. May it be noted that our client also worked under a successful doctor during her time in Italy. In all the statements provided, you will see that Miss Mary Satink is the only one who made it clear to cast doubt and, or other words, throw someone else under the bus. The young woman uses all of her words, all of her time, every second she has blaming and taking it out on someone else. In her suspect statement, she bluntly claims that her brother Andy had no right to her family's farm, and she herself was worried that with him as sheriff, he would have far too much power over Will's. And then she claims at the end, but I don't have to worry anymore. Mary's fiancé claims that she had a big heart and is kind, welcomes everyone with a hug, and yet she despised Alvina before she even had the chance to get to know her. After Andy was found, there was a suicide note found alongside of him. The ink matched the same ink that Alvina used. However, this is but only the perfect setup for our client to appear guilty, when in fact there are countless other civilians in the world who could have the same pen with the same ink that Alvina used in her dear love letter so long ago. At the end of the day, the facts that you will hear against Miss Manfreda simply do not and will not fully add up. It was not only implausible that Albina shot and murdered her soon-to-be husband, it is impossible. I submit to you to find the accused not guilty. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Put your right hand on the pledge the whole truth and the whole truth, nothing but the truth. So help you God. There you go.
Could you please state your name for the court?
Mary Satink.
And how are you related to the victim?
I am his stepsister.
And how would you say your relationship with Mr. Andy Andolshek was?
We had our differences for sure, but we were half brother and sister, so all differences aside, I loved him like a brother.
And can you describe to us post-mortem how you're feeling about the situation?
Well, definitely after all these years I've come to terms with it, but afterwards I was devastated. So.
And how would you characterize his relationship with the defendant?
I never really knew them together because she was only here for a week before he died. But he never really talked about her, which is why I was surprised when she showed up. So I couldn't really say anything about their relationship with each other because they were only together for a week before he passed.
Perfect. And about when did Miss Manfreda arrive?
It was about a week before he died.
Perfect. And what was your impression of her aside from their relationship?
She definitely, she's small, petite woman. She seemed nice, I guess, but I didn't really get a chance to know her, so.
And on a typical day, what does Miss Manfreda wear?
She wore dresses and gloves a lot.
Would you say you always saw her in gloves?
Yes.
Thank you. That concludes the questions.
Defense.
Defense would like to enter in Exhibit A, Mrs. Mary Satink's witness or suspect statement that she wrote, as well as this suspect statement from her as well. Hello, Ms. Satink. My first question is, why did you dislike Albina so much?
Excuse me, leading the witness.
Objected.
Can you say disliked?
Or, no,
I know this is like purity
he's on
cross.
You can
crossing
cross.
Oh, never mind. That's okay. I
Yeah.
repeat my statement.
Sorry.
Could you repeat the question?
Why did you dislike Albina so much?
Everything together just seemed odd to me. The arrival, the timing of her arrival and the timing of his death, it was all a little strange to me, I guess.
Where were you the morning of the incident?
Probably at home. It was like a long time ago, so I couldn't tell you for sure anymore.
All right. Albina arrived a week before the crime. Did you meet her during that time?
Yes, we were briefly acquainted, but as I said before, we never sat down and had any deep conversations with each other. Didn't get to know each other too well.
All right. In your witness statement, you claim that you handed each of Andy's letters to him. Is that correct? From Albina?
Yes.
Yes? All right. Why did you have all these letters before they arrived to Andy?
I don't think I
Why was the recipe for castor beans found in your recipe box?
So the recipe box belonged to my mother, so I inherited it from her. So all the recipes were hers.
All right. Would you know why there were castor beans in the box in general?
If there was a recipe for them in there, they could have just been left over from using them in the recipe, I guess.
In your suspect statement, you claim that Andy was always a go-getter. He always tried his hardest and pushed himself to achieve anything he wanted. And he was usually successful. You wrote that, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Later on, you also claim that but he still really wanted it. He wanted the farm. So you knew that he wanted the farm, correct?
Yes.
All right. You also, in the very last line of your suspect statement, you also claimed that I was worried he could do things and change wills when he became sheriff, but I don't have to worry now. You wrote that, correct?
Yes.
Why were you so worried of Andy's abilities to change wills?
Because I felt that my full brothers deserved the farm more because they had worked on it their whole lives and Andy hadn't really been involved in it. So I knew my brothers wanted it as well and I felt that they deserved it more.
All right. In your witness statement, you directly tried to blame Alvina, is that correct?
Could you tell me where
You write, I don't think Andy killed himself at all. I bet you that Alvina killed Andy off.
Yes.
You wrote that? Thank you. That is all, Your Honor. May I approach the jury stand?
Yes.
Here's Ms. King's witness statement as well as her suspect statement.
Would the state like to redirect? The state's second witness then?
Yep. We would like to call Alfred Smith to the stand.
Right hand. Okay. Promise to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
This camera is so unlevel.
Please state your name for the court.
Alfred Smith.
How do you know or are you related to the defendant?
My fiance Mary, and she is a stepsister of Andy, whom is engaged to Miss Manfred.
What do you do for a living?
I'm an accountant.
Is there anything that would make you suspicious of your fiance?
No, my fiance is the most caring woman I know in the whole world. I wouldn't have proposed otherwise.
Has your wife ever needed to use castor beans for anything, or has she ever mentioned them for the reason that she perhaps enjoys gardening?
No, I've never heard of the castor beans. I've never seen them in the house.
Would you like to see this as evidence? Can you determine for me whether the handwriting on the ricin recipe card matches the handwriting on the other recipe cards?
This is not my fiance's handwriting.
So you're saying that the recipe cards do not match?
That is correct.
How would you say Mary felt about her later stepbrother Andy?
She loved him as if he was her own brother through blood. There was no correlation that I can think of that would make her think otherwise.
That's everything.
Defense would like to enter in Exhibit C.
Good job.
Accepted.
Thank you. Hello, Mr. Smith.
Afternoon.
Okay. So you said that you never saw the rice and beans in the house, is that correct?
Yes?
Did you ever see them elsewhere?
No.
Had you ever see that recipe box?
No.
No. In your witness statement, you claim Mary has a big heart. She's kind. She welcomes everyone with a hug. But why is there such hate for Elvina?
Just like what you said, Albina's, I don't know, there's not really, well, everyone's got their bad day, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
How long have you known Mary Stink?
For about a year.
Prior to the event, of course. You said she was very sad after Mr. Andolshek died, correct?
Correct.
She hardly ever got out of bed. You wrote that, right?
It's in the statement, and yes, I did.
Did you spend most of the time after the crime with Mary?
To comfort her.
Did Mary ever talk about the farm?
Not after the event so much, but, I mean, it was brought up, yeah, about what would be inherited and such, but nothing out of the ordinary.
Did she ever talk about how angry she was that Andy would have a chance of getting the farm?
She just thought that her brothers had really worked for that and that they deserved a little bit more, but nothing to lead to rage over it, I suppose.
Right. Was Mary a gardener? She was.
Yeah.
What crops did she plant?
Whatever crop she felt the need to.
Can you elaborate?
Corn.
It's hard to believe she didn't inherit the farm. Did she have a garden outside your house?
No.
No. All right. And you're sure you've never seen the castor beans inside your home?
Yes, I'm positive about that.
All right.
Yes.
Suspicious. What was your relationship with Andy?
I mean, other than it being her stepbrother, nothing too personal, I guess, but
Do you ever meet Andy?
once, but it wasn't really intimate, you know, just, hey, this is my stepbrother, kind of meeting the family kind of deal, but nothing too serious.
So you would say Mary kept you pretty disconnected from Andrew?
No, I just never had the urge to get to know the man better. I had Mary, and that was good enough. She was a good woman, and needed to lead her family, so,
Did you live in the same town as Andy?
yes,
Did you vote for him as sheriff?
yes, in support of the family.
Did you ever meet Elvina?
Yes, I did.
You did.
Yes.
Well, how would you describe Elvina?
Not good.
Not good? Why?
She just had a way about her that when you just seen her, you know this woman is not the friendliest out there. Just the way she walked, the way she greeted me was not what I would consider friendly, but that's just my personal opinion.
All right. Did you have any conversations with Elvina?
Like I said, not the most friendly person, so I try to keep it to a minimum if I did. But not that I can recall.
How many occasions would you say that you met Elvina?
Only once or twice. Like I said, not really someone I like to be around.
Could you give an exact number?
Exact number? It'd have to be once.
Once?
I'm going with once.
Just for a second.
Mr. Smith,
Yes.
do you know what castor beans look like?
No, I do not.
You do not?
To be honest, no.
All right. All right.
Okay.
All right. May the defense enter in evidence exhibit B or D.
Yes.
You're on. And you're correct. You've never seen those cash registers before, correct?
Yes.
And you can confirm that's not your wife's handwriting.
Yes, sir. That's what I said.
Do you know whose handwriting that is?
I couldn't tell you.
Couldn't tell me. And you've never seen that in the house?
No, like you said, it was inherited from her mother, and until then, I guess I hadn't had interest to find it if it was, but this is, like you said, first time that this has been presented. That means.
How often were you in the kitchen, Mr. Smith?
Not gonna say anything, but I was not in there that often, though. That's not often.
Do you believe that your wife kept this recipe box inside of the kitchen?
I don't believe she did, seeing as she inherited it, because, I mean, she's got her own recipe box, so I don't see why she need that particular one with that recipe, and that handwriting, as I previously stated, does not match hers, so I would assume that she did not have it hidden away somewhere in the cupboard.
When did Mary inherit this box?
Shortly after her mother passed away.
When did her mother pass away?
That is a good question.
All right. No further questions, Your Honor.
So, again, your fiance is who? And the appropriateness as a fiance, as you're not married, correct?
Right.
Is not to live together. So, at this time, do you two live together?
No.
What?
Isn't that leading? That's
On the
leading.
redirect?
Well, then you,
I've asked,
No,
like,
say-
relevance, but
you object and say leading if you think.
Can you
it's-
lead on the
But can you lead on
No,
that?
it's still a direct, it's still a
Too late
direct
now.
examination.
Objection, leading.
Stay.
Okay. And,
yes. Sorry.
and so, overall, how much time do you guys spend together?
Decent amount of the day, you know, both have our own jobs, but after work it's over, go and hang out as any other couple would,
But for nights, do you guys spend time together?
occasionally.
And I would just like you to, no, I can't say that. And just once again, your fiance, have you ever seen her in a state of rage?
No, man. Like I said, she's a very kind-hearted person, not quick to anger, and if she were to get angry, it'd have to be over. I just couldn't even picture the scenario where she'd have to be.
Saying that, do you think there is a point she would be angered enough to kill somebody?
No.
That's all. Thank you.
Are excused.
Thank you.
Reese.
The defense would like to call Katie Reese to the stand.
Promise to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
The defense would like to enter in evidence exhibit E. Katie, what was your relationship with Mr. Andolshek?
He was my brother.
Did you like Andy?
Yes.
What was your relationship with Miss Almina?
I didn't get to meet her much, but I met her last week when she came to America to marry my brother.
How would you describe Almina?
One thing I know about her was that she was nice and she was perfect for my brother. She was very excited to come to America and marry him.
Why were you guys on a walk that morning?
Oh my God.
Yeah, exercise.
Exercise. All right. Thank you. No further questions, Your Honor.
So, Katie, how do you know the victim?
She was going to marry my brother.
Could you please tell us how you felt when he told you about his proposal to Elvina Manfred?
I was excited for him to finally find the love of his life.
When did you first meet Elvina?
When she came to America last week.
How would you describe Elvina Manfreda's mental state following the death of her fiancé?
She was very depressed and crying about it.
How did she show that?
She was always crying right after it happened and just didn't really want to talk to anyone about it. She just was very sad.
So she didn't tell anyone how she felt?
It was hard for her to express her feelings.
How would you... Actually, no. There are actually no further questions.
What did you?
What is your opinion of the defendant?
Leave me an opinion.
I'll show you your witness statement.
I believe that Elvina was very small, that she could never harm anyone, that she was very small bone, petite.
Do you think that she could have committed this crime?
No, I do not.
Thank you. No further questions.
Miss Katie, you are excused. The defense would like to call Caleb Kluger to the stand.
Promise to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth, so help me God.
Give me the... What are you looking for? The ones that show the test that they ran.
That's the fingerprint. That's what I'm asking.
No, the ink test.
I'm not asking you.
Yes, we are. Go with the ink test. Just trust me.
That was the one that looks like green. I'll ask them.
No problem. I will. Caleb, you ran, do I have to submit all this before I ask? Yes. What letter were you on?
F.
Through, just say E through H.
Okay, can I submit E through H? Okay, Caleb, you ran tests on the multiple documents on the ink, correct?
Correct.
So what did these tests, how did you perform them?
We used ink chromatography, and according to our analysis, we found that the will, suicide notes, and the love letters from Elvina all had 100% match with her signature on the fingerprint chart that she signed.
With her signature on the, I'm not talking about the fingerprints, I'm talking about the ink.
Yes, but we tested the ink from her fingerprint signature too, and they all had 100% match.
So would you say that the ink used on Elvina's love letters, was there any possible way that the ink could be in a different pen somewhere around the world?
It's possible, but highly unlikely.
Right. So you're saying that out of all the trillions of pens in the world, there's not another pen that could have the same ink in it,
It's not very likely.
but it is possible.
Possible, but not very.
The test only identifies the type of ink, not the pen used to replace the pen.
Yes, but the test only identifies to the ink, not the particular pen. Right, so the ink that is used on this suicide note, right here, along with the ink that was used on the love letters, could have the same ink, but it doesn't have to be the same pen.
The ink could be the same ink, but not the same pen, correct?
Correct. So it could have been a different pen.
Leading question.
You have to yell objection first.
Objection.
Does that mean I can keep going?
Yeah, objection, leading question.
Sustained.
Okay.
Or change subject. That's wrong.
Is there any possible way to test handwriting? Like, do you have a handwriting expert in your chemistry laboratory?
Yes, ma'am.
You do have a handwriting expert?
Yes.
And
What is his name?
who?
What is his name?
Wow, what's his name?
John Hancock.
I do have these nice, I don't think I can use them, but I do have sweet steak exhibit stickers.
Good morning. Or afternoon. How long have you been working in your position?
I'd say about 15 years.
So, of the people in your department, would you consider yourself an expert?
Yes.
And now, one more serious. Can you describe the gunshot wound on the victim?
All that we found was a very large hole made by a shotgun, close-range shotgun blast on his heart.
Well, and did you determine it was by this gun?
Yes, ma'am.
And how long would you say the gun barrel is approximately?
Approximately 26 inches.
And as a very notable CSI investigator, have you seen suicides where people have shot themselves with a gun this long in the heart? Prior suicides?
No, ma'am. It is possible, however, not at all very likely, because he would have only had would have been only about 1.7 inches away from his chest when he shot, and we found that the gun was lying in his hand, and due to kickback, it would not really be possible for that to happen.
So someone could have placed the gun there?
Correct.
And in your professional opinion, someone did shoot Mr. Andolshek other than himself?
I do believe so.
Yeah. And Mr. Bligger, with what percent accuracy would you say the ink found on the will and love letters and suicide note all came from the same source?
100%.
And you remember that, it's like me as you exhibit too.
No, I know.
Okay. So the same ink was used to write everything.
Correct.
And despite the defense, arguing that it was used from a different pen, you again refute the likelihood of this?
Correct.
So you're saying all three documents were written by the same person?
Yes.
And just to be clear, you 100% believe this in your professional opinion?
Yes.
Granted, there is human error, but...
Correct.
And have you met Miss Elvina?
Briefly, not to get to know her at all.
Okay. When you saw her, what was her appearance? What was she wearing?
Similar to what she's wearing now.
Was she
Had,
wearing...
like gloves and a dress.
And were you also the person who pulled the prints from the gun?
No, ma'am.
Somebody else. Still, as a professional, would you be able to say that even if prints were pulled from a gun, if someone was wearing gloves, could the prints not be marked on the gun?
If they're wearing gloves, it is very unlikely, like maybe 1% chance.
So if someone was wearing wearing gloves and shooting a gun, their prints would not be on the gun.
No.
That's all. Thank you.
No new evidence is being entered in here.
Okay.
How common was this ink in this time? How common was the ink used for all 3 letters in this time?
Well, since it was written in Italy, it probably wouldn't be that common in the U.S.
Can you confirm this ink is from Italy?
We could run more tests,
How many times did you repeat the ink chromatography test?
twice.
Twice? What is the amount of times that it must be replicated in order to be scientifically proven?
2 to 3 times.
2 to 3 times? Were you the only person who did this ink chromatography test?
No, our ink chromatography expert did it.
Who is that?
Also, her name is Mrs. Jane Frost.
All right. These 4 sheets are all the ink chromatography tests. Are these all the tests that you ran?
Yes.
All of those?
Mm-hmm.
How does your handwriting expert determine that a handwriting is the same?
Studies the way that the ink is formed and laid, the thickness of it, and the direction that it is written in.
Which one would you say is written in cursive and which one would you say is not?
What do you mean by that?
This one features cursive writing, this one does not, correct?
Correct.
Thank you. Can you confirm to me that these are both Alvina's letters?
Objection, relevance.
It's already been established as both of her letters.
Sustained.
That's not relevance.
Too bad done.
It's already been established. I don't see any point.
That they're both her letters? All right, that just confirms my point, Your Honor. Thank you. Can you confirm that it was William Holmes' fingerprint on the weapon?
Yes.
Was his the only fingerprint lifted from the weapon?
That we found, yes.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Wait. Yeah, wait.
The letters are written in 2 different handwritings. One's written in cursive, one is not.
Defense have another witness.
Yes, Your Honor, we'd like to call William Holmes to the stand.
Is he swearing in a yearbook? This is William Holmes.
Right. Pledge to tell the truth and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
Yeah.
So we do not have all day. No.
defense would like to enter in all of this evidence.
Accepted.
Thank you, Mr. Martin.
What?
Good morning, Mr. Holmes.
Morning.
How would you describe your relationship with Andy Andolshek prior to his death?
Just work acquaintances.
Work acquaintances. All right. Mr. Holmes, why was your shotgun at the scene of the crime?
It was actually the town's shotgun, the sheriff's department shotgun.
Why were your fingerprints on it?
Took it to the shooting range the other day.
Why are yours the only fingerprints on it?
Because I was the last one to check it out.
Do you clean your weapons after you use them?
We tend to, sometimes we just forget.
All right. Why do you think Andy would use your weapon if this was a suicide?
Probably the closest one to him.
Where is the location of your weapons locker at the jail?
Next to the anteroom.
Next to the anteroom? Who all has access to that room?
Me and him.
You and him?
Him and I.
When do you usually come to work in the morning?
During when we're supposed to, about 6 o'clock.
Were you in the building when the gunshot went off?
No, sir.
Where were you?
I'm getting ready at home
To do what?
to go to work. I wasn't feeling good that morning.
All right. Why were you the only one to mess up on your fingerprints?
Relevance. Objection, relevance.
The fingerprints were lifted from the shotgun.
If you mess them up, it doesn't matter.
Wouldn't it? Would you mess up your fingerprints?
Overruled.
Okay.
I'm not used to doing fingerprints, so I didn't know exactly what I was doing.
How long have you worked at the sheriff's office, Mr. Holmes?
About a year?
Would you consider yourself experienced?
Yes.
Were you mad that Mr. Andolshek won the election?
I was just surprised and shocked, but it wouldn't be if you just lost the election.
How are you enjoying being the sheriff now?
It's a bit stressful, but it's good.
Your slogan for your campaign was, "I want to protect my town, family, and friends." Why didn't you keep track of your shotgun?
Like I said, it was sugar and rock. So if you checked it out, I would never have known.
No further questions, Your Honor.
So, Mr. Holmes, can you repeat how long you've worked at the station?
For about a year.
How have you enjoyed your job there?
With William Holmes, or
No, just overall in general.
I've enjoyed it.
So, who all has access to the gun safe at the sheriff's office?
Me and Mr. Holmes.
Do you personally make note of every time you open the safe?
No.
So you're saying that, does anybody else make note of when they open the safe?
Not to my knowledge, no.
Is everyone meticulous in cleaning the guns?
Not really.
So they don't like go and clean the entire gun, it's just kind of a quick.
Rundown, yes.
Okay. So it's possible that Andy, with the help of Miss Manfreda, gained access to your gun?
That's possible.
So you're saying you could have been sabotaged in this way?
Yes.
Do you think Andy discussed the password to the safe with his wife?
It's possible. I'm not entirely certain what goes on between them.
Objection, incompetence.
He's not qualified to answer that question.
Make that argument.
He's not qualified to answer that question.
Sustained.
Do you love the law, Sheriff Holmes?
Yes, I do.
Do you have a family?
Yes.
Do you have kids?
Objection, relevance.
Nope. We are trying to determine his character.
Why does if he has kids relate to the case?
Do you love the kids?
Objection, relevance.
Sustained.
Okay, so you've stated that you're upset that you didn't win the sheriff election. Would you be upset enough to kill him?
No.
There are no further questions.
Mr. Holmes,
Yes.
were you aware that Andy had a box of burnt ballots in his basement?
No.
Did you know that you would have won the election had it not been for those burnt ballots?
No.
How does this make you feel?
A little upset.
Upset? What do you believe the cause of Andy's death was?
Shotgun to the heart.
Who do you believe killed Andy?
I thought he did it himself. That's what the evidence is proving, but his wife did it.
No further questions.
Witness is excused.
He wants to tell the truth and nothing but the truth. So help you God. So help you God.
Defense would like to enter in this piece of evidence.
Accepted.
Thank you, Your Honor. Hello.
Hello.
How long would you say that you've been under Mr. Holmes's authority?
About a year.
What are your feelings towards Mr. Holmes?
Well, I don't really like working underneath him. He gets kind of aggressive at times. Makes me feel uncomfortable. Makes me not want to be there.
How do you think he felt about Mr. Andolshek?
Well, I'm sure he was pissed.
Pissed enough to commit a crime?
Maybe.
How many times did you hear them get into disagreements?
Almost all the time, you know.
Very common occurrence around the office. How long do you think it took Mr. Holmes to get over the death of Mr. Andolshek?
I don't think he's really over it. I think it's still burning inside him, you know?
Fire.
Yeah.
How serious do you think Mr. Holmes takes his job?
Very seriously.
Very seriously? How would you say his attitude is now that he's been sworn in to sheriff?
I think he's changed a little bit, but he's still a pretty aggravating person, you know. He's always pretty mad when he goes around and does his business.
Right.
Yeah.
What were your feelings towards Mr. Andolshek?
I thought he was a great man, and you know, it's kind of sad for his passing, but other than that,
No further questions, John.
State.
So what is your job?
I
just work under Holmes.
And how much time probably do you spend?
About 6 hours.
So you get to know him pretty well.
Yeah.
And does Mr. Holmes have a family?
Yeah.
Objection, relevance.
Sustained.
Outside of work, do you know Mr. Holmes very well?
Not really. I don't really get into other people's lives. I don't really want to impede on what they do with their own time, but with the time I've worked with him, he doesn't seem like he's a too happy guy, He's not really happy about his life.
And would you say your job's pretty stressful, being an officer, like a pretty important job?
Yeah, it's pretty stressful, but it's even more stressful that I have to work underneath him, but
Do you think as the person before him left his job in such a sudden and urgent, unavoidable predicament that he could be trying to make up for that?
Yeah, I don't think he was really prepared for the position,
And do you have other people within your department that work under Mr. Holmes? Or is it just me?
It's just me.
And have you ever lost your temper?
A couple times, but don't we all?
Have you more than once?
Well, I'd say just once,
Your whole life?
Yeah.
No. Do you think you would do your job better if Mr. Holmes wasn't your supervisor?
I believe there'd be a lot less tension, because, again, like I said before, he's got kind of a temper, so every little thing kind of sets him off.
And would you call yourself a whiner?
No, probably not.
Okay, that's all.
Would the defense like to redirect?
No, Your Honor.
Would the defense like to call a witness?
Yes, the defense would like to call William Holmes back up to the stand.
Evidence, like K through M or something like that.
We're back at A.
I guess we could submit the actual ones. Who would like to submit this box as well? Ah. Mr. Holmes, could you reiterate, where were you the morning of the murder?
At home, because I was not feeling good that morning.
Could you be specific on what sickness you had that morning?
Relevance. Oh, objection, relevance.
It's his alibi.
You can be sick any day, it doesn't matter.
My wife was there, that counts.
Overruled.
What was your sickness that morning?
The flu.
The flu? How long had you had that sickness?
About 3 days.
3 days. What?
That was the first day you didn't come to work.
Was that the first day you didn't come to work?
Yes. I had the weekend off.
But it was on Saturday.
It was on Saturday.
Never mind.
Can I have you look over your suspect and witness statement once again, Mr. Holmes? Thank you.
Okay.
What is this box?
I am not entirely sure.
Not entirely sure. Do you know what the contents of this box hold?
No idea.
You've never seen this before in your life?
Nope.
Suspicious. I think someone running in the sheriff election would know what their ballot box looks like. How did you feel when Andy won the election?
A little upset, but everybody would be upset when they lose the election.
How close did you say you were with Andy?
Leading question. Objection, leading question.
Sustained.
It's not a yes or no question.
It's been.
It's done.
Whatever, count.
How would you say your relationship was with Mr. Andolshek?
We were work acquaintances.
All right. You said you took the shotgun to the range. How long before the murder?
The day before.
Day before? When you were sick.
Give my phone, sir.
All right. How did you feel when you found out about the burnt ballots?
A little upset.
When did you find out about the burnt ballots?
Can't recall.
Cannot recall. Was it before or after the murder?
After.
How long after, would you say approximately?
10 days.
10 days. When you arrived at 11 o'clock, the time of the murder, were you the first responder, EMS-wise, on the scene?
I believe so.
What did you do with the evidence that you found on the scene?
I started collecting the evidence, so processing it like any normal cop would do.
So you interfered with the evidence?
Not really. I did the proper stuff that any cop would do. I recorded it. I placed tape around the crime scene. Took pictures.
Why did you only take one picture, Mr. Holmes?
It looked like a suicide.
What was that picture of?
The shotgun,
Why?
because that was the murder weapon.
Why no pictures of Andy?
I cannot recall. That was a long time ago.
It was a long time ago. How did you feel when you found out that the original ruling was a suicide?
Seeing that I was the first one on the scene and that it looked like a suicide, I wasn't entirely shocked.
You weren't shocked?
It was a suicide. It looked like a suicide.
Did you ever see Mr. Andolshek's journal?
No.
How did Mr. Andolshek act when he worked?
A little paranoid. A little sketchy. Made loud noises. He would jump.
And you were the first responder on the scene, correct?
Yes.
No further questions, Your Honor. May I approach the jury bench?
Yes.
Here is Mr. Andolshek, suspect subject for this statement.
So I'd just like to reiterate a little bit about the defense, some of their line of questioning. Is it pretty common for a police officer to be first on the scene of an accident?
Yes.
So this was not a weird occasion for you to be the first one to arrive, despite like the coincidentalness?
Correct.
And following your arrival, were other first responders, ambulance, firefighters, else quick to arrive?
Yes.
Would you say quick enough that had you disturbed any of the evidence, it would have been noticed?
Yes.
And in your life, would you say, do you lie very often?
Objection, relevance.
I gonna say you lie a lot. I swear I've heard that in a movie before.
I think it was Legally Blonde, but
Still count.
Would you consider yourself a pretty honest person?
Yes.
And even had you made a mistake collecting evidence, would you have came clean and identified your mistake?
Yes.
And is it pretty common just to take one photo as the body is often there's often a, I can't say the word autopsy afterwards. So it wasn't weird that you didn't take a picture of the body.
Correct.
And a coroner later did the full autopsy, not you. Perfect, that's all. Thank you.
Would the state, or would the defense like to redirect?
No, Your Honor.
Witness is free to go.
Excuse me. Thank you, Your Honor. I forgot your name. Brandon.
Richard Jensen. Richard Jensen.
Mr. Jensen, how many cases would you say you've been on where someone's been murdered?
I'd say about 20.
It's pretty common. Pretty common.
Yeah. People are merciless.
How many photos do you guys usually take of the victim?
Multiple.
Could you give me
catch all the evidence?
Could you give me an exact number?
Well, depending on how much evidence is placed at the crime scene.
All right. No further questions, Your Honor.
Mr. Jensen, you must stay up here.
Yeah,
my bad.
we're good.
We are.
No.
Your Honor, members of the jury, my name is Malia Graham, and I will present the closing argument for the plaintiff. Throughout this court session, you have been presented with adequate information incriminating Elvina Manfreda of the murder of her husband, Andy Andolshek. You have heard testimony from Katie Reese, Mary Sitank, Alfred Smith, CSI investigator Caleb Pluger, William Holmes, who believes Elvina committed the crime, and also Richard Jensen, when really the only thing we learned from him is that he hates his job. So, you have reviewed evidence, for example, the recipe card, will, letters, fingerprints, and the letters all have the same handwriting, which was Elvina's. So what is her motive to kill? Well, you see, after Elvina meets Andy and wants to marry him, she believes that she will inherit the farm that belongs to Andy's family. To do this, she came over to the United States, killed Martin, who was Andy's stepfather, so that they together can inherit the farm. She then writes Andy's alleged will so that she will gain all of his assets, and then kills Andy to finish her sick act of self-gain. So the defense in this case began opening statements accusing Mary Sitank, but then they finish accusing William Holmes. Clearly the defense is trying to throw a Hail Mary to you, the jurors. Do not be fooled by the trickery of Attorney Lingle and their co-counsel. Find the defendant guilty. There is without a doubt that Elvina is the murderer of Andy. Give the family of Andy some closure of this sick and truly disgusting act, and convict the rightful person of this crime. This sickly deceiving criminal will be behind bars and not cause any more terror to this world, and the family of Andy Andolshek will be able to rest knowing that they are safe. The defense has used opinion and fanciful questioning to prove their tall tale, while we base our conclusion on cold, hard facts. I submit to you to find the accused, Elvina Manfreda, guilty. Thank you for your consideration.
Your Honor, members of the jury, my name is Jaden Allen, and I and my co-counselors, Trevor Lingle and Hannah Gonzarowski, will present the closing argument. You have heard testimony from Mary Sitank, William Holmes, Katie Reese, Richard Jensen, Alfred Smith, and Caleb Pluger. You have reviewed You have reviewed the evidence about the burned ballots of William Holmes. You have heard testimony from Richard Jensen about his anger directed at Andy. Out of all the witnesses, Richard knows him best. From his statement, only Andy and Williams had access to the guns. Only Williams could have gotten the shotgun out of the vault. And Williams' own testimony said he was sick the day Andy was killed. By calling sick in at this time, would provide William the time and the resources to murder Andy. William himself said he had been sick for several days, yet the day of Andy's death was his first day to call in sick. William also said in his witness testimony that he thought Andy had committed suicide. Then his statement here said he believed Elvina had murdered Andy. The will and the suicide note was written in Elvina's hand. However, she wrote the will in a moment of panic. She had just come to America and upon Andy's murder would have nothing left in a foreign and unfamiliar country. Andy had lied to Elvina about himself being on Martin's will. Upon discovering Andy's murder, Elvina hastily wrote a suicide letter in an attempt to recover Andy's possessions since they had not yet been married. Getting the farm would be the only remnant Elvina would have to remember her love Andy by. Would you, jury members, not cling to the memories of your deceased loved ones? Are you as a jury willing to accuse an innocent woman who has already experienced loss of her future husband-to-be after fleeing her home country to escape a cruel regime? Your honors and members of the jury, I implore you to please review the evidence presented to you. I submit to you to find the accused not guilty. Thank you for your consideration.
Give the jury deliberation instructions. The law requires the jury verdict in this case to be unanimous. Thus, all 7 of you must agree that the defendant is either guilty or not guilty in order to reach a verdict. When you are taken to the jury room to begin your deliberations, you should first select one foreperson. The foreperson should see to it that jury discussion goes forward in a sensible and orderly fashion, and that each juror has the opportunity to discuss the issue fully and fairly. The attitude and conduct of jurors at the beginning of the deliberations is very important. At that time, it is usually not helpful for any juror to make a strong expression of opinion or to stand for a certain verdict. Such a juror may be unwilling to change an opinion, even if it is later thought to be incorrect. The jurors have a duty to consult one another and to deliberate for the purpose of reaching an agreement. It can be done without violence to an individual judgment. This means that you may fully and fairly discuss among yourselves all of the evidence you have seen and heard in this courtroom about this case together with the law which relates to this case as contained in the instructions. In the course of deliberation, a juror has a right to re-examine prior held views and opinions. If the juror is convinced to do so by fair and honest discussion by any member or members of the jury, based upon evidence the jury saw and heard in the trial and the law as given you in these instructions. However, no juror should surrender an honest opinion as to the weight or effect of evidence or as to the innocence or guilt of the defendant because the majority of the jury feels otherwise, or for the purposes of returning a unanimous verdict or to prevent a mistrial. Your foreperson must sign any verdict upon which you agree. The defendant is charged with the offense of deliberate homicide. The defendant may be found guilty if proof shows beyond a reasonable doubt the defendant committed any one or more of such acts. But in order to find the defendant guilty, all the jurors must agree that the defendant committed the same act or acts. It is not necessary that the particular act or acts committed so agreed upon be stated in the verdict, or the following format may be used. The defendant is charged with, in count 1, of information with the crime of deliberate homicide violation. In order to find the defendant guilty, it is necessary for the prosecution to prove beyond a reasonable doubt the commission of a specific act constituting the crime within the period alleged. Also, in order to find the defendant guilty, you must unanimously agree upon the commissions of the same specific act constituting the crime within the period alleged. It is not necessary that the particular act or acts committed so agreed upon be stated in the verdict. commits the offense of deliberate homicide if the person purposefully or knowingly causes the death of another human being. To convict the defendant of deliberate homicide, the state must prove the following elements: that the defendant caused the death of Andrew Andolshek, a human being, and the defendant acted purposely or knowingly. If you find from your consideration of the evidence that all of these elements have been proved beyond a reasonable doubt, you should find the defendant guilty. If, on the other hand, you find from your consideration of the evidence that any of these elements has not been proved beyond a reasonable doubt, then you should find the defendant not guilty.
Follow me.
So, I'm not 100% positive about what you guys are thinking right now, but with what information was given by Mr. Will, I can't think of the last name right now, and Will Holmes, and the defense that provided, I guess, the information for Miss Manfreda. I'm pretty much on the side that Mr. Holmes has committed said act, because you had Bradley telling us about how Mr. Holmes had a anger issue, and he tended to use that quite often. And then the fact that Bradley said Andy was a very loving person, or not loving person, but he said he was a good man. And Holmes said opposite of that for Andy. And I think he was just saying that because he lost the election, even though Andy cheated. I think he was saying that because he lost the election for sheriff.
His story also didn't seem very straight up.
Engaged, correct?
Yes.
Whenever you pretty much get engaged to someone, do you
You
write?
don't do that.
This is-
You don't do that before you
When
get
you're
married.
This is the
Well,
last,
I mean, whenever you.
last will, that means all his money and his land. And she did all that. Not him. She forged his signature.
Well, I mean, he
Well,
also
they're not
had
saying
pretty
she
much
didn't do
PTSD
that.
from the war, so she can kind of tell that if something goes south pretty quick, she has it there.
Right.
Because
she doesn't wanna be
otherwise the
left.
house would just get sold.
How do we know that she
None of
didn't?
them
It doesn't
would
mean
get
that she didn't love it.
How do we know that she didn't hold him at knife point? Because she didn't know guns. How do we know she didn't?
They just didn't
Why are you assuming? Why are you assuming this?
Yeah,
knife
quit
point?
assuming. We're not assuming anything in this jury.
Point of order.
Or in the
State your
jury.
point.
Cool,
That's
we got,
fine.
We got
That's all I
6
had.
minutes.
But
She doesn't-
aren't you assuming a lot to
She
think
doesn't-
that Holmes
You are assuming, yeah.
that Holmes did or didn't know about the ballots? I don't know what is his motive to kill?
He said they found out 10 days later about.
But what did he say
But
first?
before that, he said he didn't know about him at all until the trial.
That also
So
means that his story is
Bradley said
unbelievably
There was a lot
sketchy.
of arguments that happened between them. He still was in the paper that
And
he
who
wrote.
gave that testimony?
Bradley did.
And so
But-
you have to think about the people that are on the stand. Who is believable? Was Bradley's testimony believable? Because you're saying
Yes.
Hunter's testimony was
He was
shaky,
just
but
funny.
you're not believing
Bradley-
it.
I believe Bradley's, but
Hunter
because
gave a
Bradley
weird
seemed more
story.
convincing than Hunter, who just kept shying away,
Okay.
just constantly.
Okay.
Bradley also said that has been on 20 cases.
And he spent 6 hours a day with him,
With
So-
you.
with Hunter.
Yeah.
So he
Oh.
knows him.
And he said he has a very short temper, correct? Or-
Yeah.
The
And,
normal hunter that you think of, and that's
Yeah.
I see why you made him that. So, have we changed your mind?
Sure.
No, we need 100%. Make us sure.
No, you need to believe in your answer. You can't.
I feel like Hunter could do it, but so could she.
Well,
But that's
everybody.
that's the decision.
That's the
always,
reasonable, but that's the reasonable doubt. If you feel like Hunter could do it, then you have to vote not guilty for Almina because that's the
Not guilty
reasonable
then.
doubt.
Okay.
okay, we have it then.
Okay?
Okay.
And we hear the jury's verdict.
We, the jury, find that Alvina Manfreda is not guilty.